My main message today is that the power lies within each one of us to create the world that we want to live in. One of the key messages coming out of the first 3 Wednesdays of the Employee Wellbeing Congress is that individual action drives collective change, and where collective change takes us will become our future. This is an incredible challenge to us in the reward and employee benefits community. But to flip that around, as reward and benefit professionals, we're in a vital position to rethink and reimagine the employee-employer relationship. So I want to use this talk to reflect on where we as a profession and industry find ourselves, what our challenges are, what the trends are due to the tumultuous change that we're going through. We are not going to go back to the way we were. We need to work within our new reality as it is right now, but also as it changes, as it surely will. And what we need to do from now on needs to be dynamic, it needs to be fluid, it needs to be agile. And these are not words that we traditionally associate with reward and employee benefits, and especially not pensions. So let's strip it back to basics. At its core, reward and benefits is about recruiting and retaining the best talent in the labour market. And clearly that labour market has taken a huge hit. The incredible jolt of the global pandemic has caused huge crevices between sectors of the economy where jobs may never come back, either jobs that were predicted to shrink in the long term anyway, or jobs we thought were safe that have been wiped away in a matter of weeks, through to sectors where jobs will eventually come back, but could take years, versus the other side of the crevice, where there are areas of job growth and even labour talent shortages. Now, we've been so focused on the impact of the pandemic that we might have temporarily forgotten to look at the other sweeping forces at play within our labour market. Firstly, Europe has a declining labour supply. Its working age population is predicted to shrink by 4% over the next 10 years. If you're thinking, well, maybe that will be resolved by the number of jobs that we're seeing disappearing due to the rise of automation, then I'm sorry to say that the shrinking and aging of the population in Europe will still trump the impact of automation. In June, the McKinsey Global Institute's report, The Future of Work in Europe, said the pace of automation will lead to the loss of 53 million jobs. And on this graph, you can see that it flags up the double whammy of automation and COVID-19. Workers most likely to be displaced by automation are also those most at risk of the COVID-19 pandemic. Sectors such as wholesale and retail will be hardest hit. Also, automation will continue to hollow out the middle skill, middle earning jobs, with most jobs growth happening at the highly skilled level and at the low end. Chancellor Rishi Sunak's announcement last week made it clear that the government is going to rip off the band-aid from those sectors where job shrinkage is inevitable and instead focus support where they believe there's hope of recovery or growth. The furlough scheme was needed in the short term, but there are more voices saying that in the medium term it hampers the reallocation and reskilling of labour. So the challenge for you as employers, regardless of your situation, regardless of your sectors, how do you plan to react? Whether your workforce is growing or whether it's shrinking, the skills that you need going forward are changing rapidly. And this confluence of the long-term labour trends and the short-term shocks have caused seismic shifts to the talent market that are impossible to ignore as you plan your reward and benefits for 2021 and beyond. If you haven't already, and I imagine most of you have, now is the time to rethink your talent plans, skill development, and your organization's social responsibility to your community and to other employers. Many of the leading employers which spoke at the Employee Wellbeing Congress this year have clearly been proactive on this for a number of years. Last month, the World Economic Forum produced a report, Human Capital as an Asset, which showed that even before the pandemic, as many as 63% of employers had or are planning to or are considering redeploying and or reskilling workers. The report states, as you can see on the slide, how employers decide to protect, preserve and sustain the workforce will impact on their reputation and their long-term resilience as an organization. It will impact how they deliver value back to themselves, as well as externally to the economy and society in our fast-changing world. For example, Vish Bildawu, who's VP Global Benefits and Wellbeing at Centrica, speaking at this conference last week, said the vision that he is working on is to create peace of mind for Centrica employees. And he described how Centrica is ensuring that it will be flexible for the future world of work by using its CEO's three priorities of putting colleagues first, then customers, and cash third. We've seen this focus on the purpose of the business superseding focus on profit being taken extremely seriously among increasing numbers of CEOs across the globe over a last number of years. Back in January 2018, Larry Fink, CEO of the world's largest investment house, BlackRock, wrote a letter to CEOs entitled A Sense of Purpose, which caused shockwaves across the corporate world at the time. In it, he said, society is demanding that companies serve a social purpose. Fink believes that in order for financial performance to be sustainable, companies must understand the impact their businesses have on society and how trends such as slow wage growth, rising automation, climate change affect their business potential for growth. So the seeds of the importance of purpose and social responsibility was sown long before the rise of the focus of compassion and kindness that we saw during the pandemic. But all four concepts are actually intertwined and are catalysts for each other. In my view, for most people, it's easier to grasp how to act with compassion and kindness. It's something that we can each do in our daily life. Loftier aims of purpose and social responsibility can be harder to envision and harder to fit into our current thinking about what corporations are for. So it's going to take a bit of unthinking and an agility of mindset. And those are behaviors that us humans can sometimes struggle with. But coming back to that World Economic Forum report, it points out that traditionally, companies have taken an inward, standalone, self-sustaining view of business and human capital strategy. However, successful businesses in the future will thrive as participants in ecosystems, working with communities in which they operate. So it's probably a good idea at this point for me to throw in some real-life practical examples so we can see how that could potentially look. Nicola Wells, Global Head of Reward for Unilever, was on our panel last week alongside Vish from Centrica. And when we were speaking to Nicola in advance of the day, she gave us loads of examples of what Unilever are doing. I'm just picking the one where in Mexico, Unilever partnered with General Motors, where the General Motors engineers and factory workers on furlough came to work for Unilever on a temporary basis because Unilever needed to rapidly scale up to meet new demands for its health products. We saw the same with McDonald's and Aldi, where the restaurant chain had closures and restricted working due to the pandemic, while the grocery store scrambled to recruit enough staff to fulfill customer demand. In both examples, the original employer was able to retain valued talent after the assignment, while the receiving employer was able to meet increased customer demand. And the employees themselves gained new work experiences and skills while still earning full wages. And no doubt this was better for their overall well-being than not working and being really uncertain about their futures. This concept of working as part of an ecosystem could lead to positive outcomes that we can barely imagine right now. To explain what I mean, let's look back to an older example of doing things completely differently that had a long-term unexpected outcome that's benefited us all, corporations and people alike. Until 200 years ago, formal education was largely reserved for the elite. But as industrialization changed the way we worked, factory owners became the biggest champions of the Elementary Education Act of 1870, which made education universally available in England. Now, factory workers were keen on schooling because they saw it as a great way to train workers to turn up on time, be agreeable, and do what they were told. Sitting in a classroom all day with a teacher is a great way to coach that. We can now see that universal education completely changed our societies, how we live, our well-being, the success of corporations. So, having galloped through a few of the sweeping changes impacting talent and business, I'd like to now come at things from the opposite end, individual actions that you might want to consider about your reward and employee benefits programs. Because, as I said at the start of my talk, individual action drives collective change, and where collective change takes us will become our future. Firstly, our industry is taking responsible reward more seriously these days, usually in the context of executive incentives. The pandemic caused a much bigger pause for thought during last April's reporting season because of the poor balance between many of those at the top and what they earn versus what those at the bottom earn. But also impacts to the community, to the environment, driven by businesses, are driving change in reward strategies too, such as linking exec reward to ESG principles. A strong theme coming out of the Wellbeing Congress this year is more employers listening to employees, not just surveying them, actually talking to them. And we've all become more familiar with colleagues' personal circumstances and just how unique and individual we each are as human beings. So now's a perfect time to really shake up the benefits package, which can still be rooted in a time when the majority of the working population were white British men supporting a nuclear family, a point that came up really strongly in this morning's panel discussion. Now it's time to rethink reward and employee benefits and wellbeing packages to ensure that they're far more personalised, more compassionate, and more inclusive of the whole workforce. Last week, Dame Carol Black implored employers to capture more granular wellbeing data so that whatever you do, you can measure the impact of interventions. Get yourself a baseline benchmark, no matter how simple to start with, and build from there. Aim to identify age, gender, ethnicity and race, disability, socioeconomic level, so that you can check your inclusion and spot how different cohorts are affected. You don't only need to rely on your own data. Many employers look to external sources and extrapolate. The Office of National Statistics is a rich source of freely available data, even if you have to add the granularity yourselves. For example, if you look at the most recent ONS report, Personal and Economic Wellbeing in Great Britain, you'll see that financial well-being of parents has been particularly badly affected by the pandemic, much worse than non-parents. Part of the reason is more parents than non-parents reported a reduction in working hours. More parents than non-parents reported not being able to work from home. The cross-impact between employment and financial well-being is huge. So financial well-being doesn't end at how much you pay employees and encouraging people to save more. There is room to offer more other forms of support to specific employee groups, such as parents, for example. And did you treat all of your home workers the same, expecting them to sort out their own home desk setup without regard for how different everyone's homes and financial circumstances are? Data also tells us that more women than men joined the workforce over the past decade and a half, and more older workers. So we are seeing a rise in interest in benefits that support female talent, from childcare to supporting fertility and menopause, while insurance products which exclude too many well-being issues related to being female are being challenged. Speaking of insurance, I know both employers and insurers are concerned about the future cost rises of insurance, both due to the medical advances taking place and the impact of stored up physical and mental illnesses and injuries not attended to during the pandemic. September ONS data shows that nearly 3 in 10 working adults changed their work location during the pandemic and are planning to continue to work from home at least some of the time. So reduced travel, changes to inner city housing costs are areas to watch. For example, do you keep London-weighted salaries for those who now work outside the capital? Of course, those employees who unexpectedly decided to continue working for you while based in other countries comes with its own fun tax implications, as all of you who work in global mobility know very well. But what else will shift the longer people work from home? Well, the loneliness or the need to get out of busy, distracting households, darker autumn and winter months, could see employees looking for facilities closer to where they live. For example, COVID-safe shared workspaces or places to exercise indoors. Options to get out and socialise are being increasingly curtailed. So employers are going to be crucial to coming up with creative and compassionate ideas to keep social and mental well-being in good order, particularly in the run-up to Christmas. Whatever direction you just choose to go in, I urge you to consider the biggest sweeping changes as well that we are experiencing as a backdrop to any changes that you may make to your reward and benefit packages. Ask your employees what their pressing issues really are. Don't just sit in HR and benefit teams and make assumptions. Also be aware that you may well have to remove benefits that you might consider to be stalwarts of your package in order to include new benefits that are more inclusive and will meet the needs of a wider range of your employees. Right now, we are in a world where kindness and compassion need to stay at the forefront, and our purpose should be to listen to and care for our workforces, because that's the only way to recruit and retain talent in a way that will sustain your organization in the long term. Never mind, help it survive and thrive through 2021. So those are just a few of the themes that I wanted to bring up today and hopefully give you food for thought as you go out into the discussion groups that will be starting in a few moments. But right now, Maggie, I'm open to answering any questions anybody has.
Many thanks, Debbie. That was a fantastic presentation today. Plenty to think about. Ecosystems, automation, data and granularity, changing working patterns and more. There's plenty for people to digest in the next forthcoming video roundtables. There was just one point that I wanted to follow up a little bit more. Going back to the Education Act of 1870, it trips off the tongue. Given that part of the focus for that and the impact was to say turning up at an office on time every day or in a factory every day was really important. Do you think that still has a value to corporations now?
No, I don't. I think we've got into a habit and that's partly why I wanted to raise that, of why that came in as a habit, and actually not that long ago, relatively speaking. And we still work like that so often. And yet now the pandemic has brought an opportunity to think about that completely differently. And so far, study after study, we have seen is productivity has gone up. So I think it's time to really shake that one on its head and go, do we still need people turning up at a set time to a set workplace to listen to what their managers have to say? I'm not saying that we shouldn't have places where we come together socially one day when the pandemic's over. I think that will be key, but let's do it differently. We don't work in factories. It's no longer the industrial era.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Debbie. And virtual Christmas parties, do you think we're going to be seeing any of those this year when we talk about coming together and producing more social workplace?
I don't know. I've seen mutterings on Twitter where some people are talking about the fact they will be doing that for their staff, other people recoiling in horror at the idea of doing a virtual Christmas party and us all sitting and doing it through video. So I'm hoping that by starting the conversation now, end of September, we can get creative, perhaps share ideas between ourselves. REBA members talk about what they're doing. I think the office quiz has probably been done to death. There must be other ways that we can help people be social. But you know what? Companies are out doing their company awards system, prizes for staff and so on. That does seem to be going down well. So I think we'll see an evolution of how we do Christmas parties this year.